This episode of the podcast has been brought to you by Sweet Cheetah Publicity. Sweet Cheetah is an inclusive, socially conscious PR collective that puts their money where their mouth is. They have a current roster of bands that reads like a greatest hits anthology. Brainiac, Catholic School, Jawbox, The New Amsterdams, Oceans in the Sky. The list goes on and on. They also do PR for record labels such as A La Carte, Arctic Rodeo, Steadfast, Rad Girlfriend, and so many more. How do they pay it forward? How do they put their money where their mouth is? By generating thousands of dollars in annual charitable donations to the likes of Women in Vinyl, Coalition of Communities of Color, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and many, many more. The man has the receipts. I've seen them. It is real. The artists, labels, and podcasts Sweet Cheetah works with are curated with an eye on working primarily with friends. You could find Sweet Cheetah on all of the social media platforms, be it Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Just look for Sweet Cheetah PR and they will be there. He's been Tim, I've been Peter, and Sweet Cheetah has been beautiful. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. I'm your host, Peter, and I am still here. Tonight on the show, I have the distinct honor to bring to you my discussion with Grant Lawrence, broadcaster, musician, and writer based in Vancouver, British Columbia, associated with the CBC Music and CBC Radio 3 channels. Now, Grant was a member of the late, great punk/garage rock band, the Smugglers. At the beginning of Grant's storied life, he'd gone to high school with none other than Nardwar the Human Serviette. Nardwar went on to release the first Smugglers record, 1991's At Marineland. Moving on to Pop Lama, Radiation, Mint, and Lookout Records. The Smugglers became an institution unto themselves, sharing stages with Manor Man, the Donnas, and many other luminaries of that time period, like the Mr. T Experience, for example. Grant has also authored 3 books as of late: Adventures in Solitude, What Not to Wear to a Nude Potluck, and Other Stories from Desolation Sound in 2010. His second book, The Lonely End of the Rink, Confessions of a Reluctant Goalie, came out in 2013. And most importantly, his third book, Dirty Windshields, The Best and Worst of the Smugglers' Tour Diaries, was published in 2017. The Smugglers' first collection record, and incidentally, my first purchase of a Smugglers record, would be In the Hall of Fame, a collection of 7 inches, compilation tracks, and whatnot, has finally been given the vinyl treatment on Lava Socks Records, so do yourselves an immense favor. Head over to Lava Socks on Bandcamp and buy that double vinyl gatefold piece of gorgeous, gorgeous music now. When I say this was an honor, I am devoid of hyperbole. Grant has been a fixture in my consciousness since 1993. This record, the one we're speaking about, the raison d'etre for this interview, has been in my collection and a favorite since I was in high school. Now, I'm sure you all know I love doing this podcast, but it's not free. not for me. I end up paying for, the streaming, the hardware it takes to get this going. I had to pay an IT person to get this episode off of a corrupt hard drive. That is, where I'm coming from. This is a labor of love. I don't just do this and it's free. It's just something I do in my spare time. No, I mean, it's another job. It's another job that I don't necessarily get paid for. As a matter of fact, I run in the red to do it. So if you enjoy this podcast, I won't beg you for money, but what I will ask of you is to like, rate, subscribe, and review this podcast wherever you're listening to it right now. If you want to go a step further, head over to my Instagram or Facebook. Like and share posts about episodes. And that means the world. That's the biggest commodity out there, right? If you want to go even further, you could donate via PayPal or Venmo, or if you really want to go for the gold. Right here, wherever you're listening, go to the page that is displayed. Click on the description, scroll down to the bottom, and you will see that you can become a paid subscriber. In doing so, you will have access to the compilation record I'm releasing very soon. You will have access to one episode a month that no one else gets to hear. And when that really takes off, I'm going to once a week. A once a week special episode for everyone paying to listen to my podcast, to be a part of my community, to be a producer of the show, in essence. It's pretty cool if you dig what I'm doing. And if you're listening, you probably dig what it is that I'm doing. But I'll move past all that. Grant is a man for all seasons. Musician, writer, broadcaster. And he's so much fun to talk to. He has such a great personality. He has so many stories. He has so many relationships that are worthy of your time. Worthy of, the bandwidth to take it in and to experience this human being's life journey. I hope you love this as much as I did. I hope you give it the space that it needs to breathe. So right now, I'd like to play for you a little bit of the Smugglers from the aforementioned record.
Okay, let's rock.
Rock and roll was never this fun.
All right. All right. All right. All right. Hey, hey. Ah, you're dirty, man. You're dirty. You're dirty. Hey! Keep it going. Oh, come on, get sexy. Rock and roll, stand in the sun. 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 We used to love Elvis till we saw the best mode. We used to love Elvis till we saw the best mode. We used to love Crimson till we saw MD. We used to love Crimson till we saw MD. Rock and roll was
That is, rock and roll was never this fun. From the Smugglers in the Hall of Fame. Side A, LP 1, Track 1. And this is Grant. In conversation with me on the book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. And I'm recording on mine. All right.
Very cool.
So just to kind of preface this a little bit with my own experience with your music, when I was still in high school in 1993, I'd come across what is being reissued now, which is the collection, the in the Hall of Fame collection, which was 7 inches and singles and the like, correct?
Yeah, it was a kind of a mix. It was weird because the first 10 songs were all like brand new songs, hadn't been released anywhere, and were basically almost its own album. And then, CDs were kind of new in the early 90s. And if you remember, I think you could fit on like 80 minutes of music or something like that. So there was this impulse to fill the space. And so we were like, well, what are we going to do with all that extra space on this CD? Because vinyl, you only have this finite space, and CD, it suddenly felt like this, open prairie. So what we did was we took about five or six songs from our first 2 vinyl albums, and they were added on to In the Hall of Fame, because the reasoning was that, and it actually turned out to be true, that way more people are going to hear these songs on a CD than will have heard them on those 2 first vinyl releases. And for a lot of people, this record In the Hall of Fame really was their first exposure to the Smugglers. It is, a lot of people consider it our first album. But as you say, yeah, it was kind of an amalgamation of new and old stuff at the time.
And what was kind of cool for me is I got to backtrack a little bit and, pick up the 10-inch and go after some of those other 7 inches, which at that time weren't that, they were hard to find, but I didn't have that hard of a time finding them. I think it'd be more difficult now.
Yeah, they're pretty obscure stuff. Like every once in a while, like somebody will say, hey, I found this. Do you want it? And I'll usually say yes.
Mm-hmm.
People purge their stuff all the time. And most of the time I'll say yes. So, because there's some stuff I was missing. But yeah, I remember like one song in particular from In the Hall of Fame came out first on a small, they became a bit of a larger label as the 90s went on, but Screaming Apple Records from Germany. And they put out that Sexy Thing single. And I didn't have one for the longest time. But they actually started doing quite well in the pop punk world later on in the 90s.
And that's what I found really interesting. I mean, I also am coming from hardcore and punk. To me, you guys kind of fit more like, if we're talking punk, like the Heartbreakers, or, even a little bit later, the Replacements, you would have fit in a bit more well with. To me, it was just really great rock and roll. I could see you guys playing more with the Stray Cats than with Operation Ivy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, we were a kind of a funny band. I sometimes describe ourselves, the Smugglers, as kind of like the Forrest Gump of rock and roll, because we were involved or on the periphery of all these major scenes, and we often benefited from all of them. So, like some of the equivalent to those bands in the Seattle area would have been like the Young Fresh Fellows in the early 90s. They were good friends with the Replacements, and they were considered kind of like a Seattle version of that Minneapolis scene that was developing with the Replacements and Soul Asylum and Husker Du and the Fun Seekers and bands like that.
Yep.
And so we glommed on to that Young Fresh Fellows bandwagon and did a lot of touring with them in our early years. And then grunge came along, and the Smugglers started playing with sub pop bands. And you can even In the Hall of Fame, you can even hear our sort of attempt at a grunge song which was a song called Your Mom's the Devil, where there's distortion on my vocals and the guitars are a little more gnarly and it's a little faster. And that song actually ended up doing quite well. And I still hear from lots of people that it was their, teen anthem or whatever. But yeah, we tried pretty much everything. And then we were in the garage scene for a while when that started doing really well.
Mhm.
And then we were just sort of an opportunistic band. And then pop punk broke and we slid over to that scene and ended up on Lookout Records. So say what you will, but other people might describe it a little more disparagingly. But I always, how like in Forrest Gump, he'd be like kind of off to the side when some major presidential event is going on. I remember being at Lookout the day like the gold and platinum records arrived for Green Day, for whatever Kerplunk or whatever the record was.
Kerplunk and 10,000 Slap Happy.
Yeah. And those big framed albums arrived and we happened to be there. And so of course we're in the group photo for no reason. The Smugglers are in the group photo of the platinum and platinum and gold records for Green Day. So our career was a lot of that, just like being in the right place at the right time.
That's why, that makes sense that I was such a fan then, because it just so happened all throughout my high school career from 89 through 93, I was in every senior photo.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, you're opportunistic just like us.
Absolutely.
And those were kind of like those were informative those influential years. Like we would play all ages shows everywhere. And so we had a lot of fans that were in high school and that first found us when they were in high school. And we started our band when we were in high school. So we always had an affinity because we remembered what it was like to be turned away at shows where you got ID'd or whatever. And so, really, especially we started out in the Nardwar scene, which was totally all ages. Nardwar would put on shows in Vancouver and they were always all ages. And then the garage scene was more of a bar scene. That was a bit challenging for us because we were quite young. But then the Lookout scene was all back to all ages again. Yeah. So it was like high school. And it was great, it's good to, I'm proud that we clicked with high school kids like all over North America. It's really great.
How did the Lookout thing first come to pass though? Because to me, that connection was always great, but it just seemed very far afield for Lookout.
Yeah, well, it wasn't as the reason was you remember the band Cub?
Very, very well. Very well.
Yeah. So me and Dave from the Smugglers did a really short West Coast tour with Cub. And we had started to hear about this band. Like wherever we toured, we would hear about this band called the Ne'er-do-Wells. Mm-hmm. And people kept saying to us, the Smugglers, have you heard of this band, the Ne'er-do-Wells? They look like you, like they dress in thrift store suits. And they sound like you. And they kind of behave like you. Like, they're fun and they're positive and they like to have a good time and, they're nonviolent and all that kind of stuff. And so we kept hearing about these guys. And then on that Cub tour, they were touring with DOA and DOA would have like 3 shows on, 2 days off, 3 on, 2. And I was like, you can't have all these days off. The Smugglers were whip crackers. Like we'd play every night for weeks on end on tour. And because I remember Mike Watt from Firehose and the Minutemen, I guess, saying, saying, if you're not playing, you're paying. And that always stuck with me. Like, you're paying for a hotel room, you're paying for gas, or you're paying for food. So we would always try to play. And I tried to instill that with Cub. And they're like, well, we're on a DOA tour. We're opening for them. So we're at their beck and call. And I said, well, let's fill the off days with shows. Yeah. So I connected with the Ne'er-do-Wells and connected Cub with them. So we met the Ne'er-do-Wells and they were right at that time just kind of morphing into the High Fives, which was kind of that high energy garage pop sort of thing. They were really into the milkshakes and the head coats, and so were we. And so we instantly hit it off with the ne'er-do-wells and the high fives. And we started touring with them and playing shows with them. And it was very similar. It was almost as if the same band was playing two sets. Like, what is happening? Like, we were almost interchangeable. We were Smugglers were maybe a little heavier. And then Chris Imlay, I give all the credit to Chris Imlay from the High Fives. He said, you should join Lookout Records. You should come. What's your label situation? And we were with Pop Lama, and that was kind of an older roster. A lot of bands were a lot older than us, like the Fastbacks, the Young Fresh Fellows. We loved them all.
Oh yeah.
Girl Trouble, but they were a little bit not quite next generation, but like Big Brother kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Lookout, all the bands were our age, and all the staff were our age, save for Larry. Yeah, and then we met Larry Livermore, and that was kind of the big thing. We got along with him, and he's still one of a really good friend of mine to this day. And we just clicked. We clicked with that scene, and the Smugglers always brought the party, really good vibes, a lot of fun. We treated rock and roll like a gift, where it's a party, and let's have a party every single night. And when I say party every single night, I don't mean like, snorting coke or whatever. Yeah. I just mean like having a great time, dancing, having some beer or whatever. We probably had way too much of that, but they jive with that too, because the Lookout scene was about having a good time. It was really gender balanced. The Smugglers, our band, was not gender balanced, but we were always, into an equal opportunity dance floor. Like if there was too much slamming and women were getting knocked to the ground or whatever, we'd always like slow things down, not to a Fugazi level. We'd always keep it light. Like we wouldn't lecture, but we'd be like, hey, let's make sure that, the girls are able to dance. Like it's a pretty boring dance floor without girls. So just a little word of the wise. And so like using humor like that would work too. So that was how that Lookout thing all came together, is we just kind of clicked after meeting the High Fives.
It's incredible. And like, if you really think about what Larry was doing, there are bands like Neurosis were on Lookout at one point. Like it was kind of a great little melting pot of different styles.
It was, yeah. I mean, Larry, I give him a ton of credit, because I think he's one of these rare sort of Svengali like figures in the music industry, where he just had an amazing ears. And so like Neurosis and Pansy Division, like real groundbreakers, as the first all gay rock band, and they did very, very well, and they sold a lot of records on Lookout. And then of course Green Day was like changed the world in you could argue, and changed Lookout. But Screeching Weasel, the Queers, like all these bands, the Mr. T Experience, were hugely influential. And so to be in that stock of bands was really awesome. And we never did as well as any of those bands that I mentioned, but as soon as we got onto Lookout, like everything was better. Like our record sales were good for really like the first time they were building within the Hall of Fame, but they kind of, for us, broke wide open with Selling the Sizzle. And we were able to sustain that for 10 years of good tours and great shows all over the place. And, give a ton of credit, because having that Lookout logo on our record just vaulted us from.
It's important.
Yeah. And Pop Lama had a little bit of cred, but nothing like this stamp of approval that Lookout Records was, that Eyes logo. I mean, I remember it hitting me when we were on our first Lookout tour, and with the Young Fresh Fellows or with Garage Rock, we would play with like cool bands. Like we'd play with Manor Astroman or Young Fresh Fellows or the Devil Dogs, stuff like that. And these were all awesome bands. But once you got out of like the big cities, the crowds would go down fast.
Yeah.
And you'd be playing kind of like, you leave Chicago or you leave New York, and all of a sudden you're playing to like 30 people in a little bar. And sometimes that can be great, but not when you're trying to pay everybody. And then I remember like right away, our first lookout, the first show of our first ever lookout tour was at the Elvis Room in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We had never been to New Hampshire, never even heard of the Elvis Room. It was with the Mr. T Experience, and I think might have been the Dillinger 4 opening on that tour. And we were in the middle, and the place was packed front to back with kids, 300 or whatever the place held. And I remember sitting at the back with our merchandise guy, and all I could see on all of the t-shirts and the stage lights pointing towards the stage was on the back of all these shirts was the Lookout Records logo.
Yeah.
I was like, Scotty, man, I think we just like tapped into something like really big. And sure enough, like our merchandise on that tour, we were used to selling a few CDs, a couple of copies of In the Hall of Fame, maybe 10, 20, if it was an all ages show. All of a sudden that was going to like 100 CDs a night. And like, we were like completely overwhelmed at what kids were buying in the early to mid 90s.
Yeah, I remember the first time I'd seen you guys was with Manor Astro Man, and they're one of my favorite bands.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Hard Stop, one of my all-time favorite bands, and that was a mind blower of an experience.
So where was that?
I want to say it was in New York.
Might have been. We toured with them all over the place, and we first hooked up with them even before they were on Estrus. The guy from Estrus absolutely hated the Smugglers for dumb reasons, but we would be friends with all those Estrus bands and play with them. And the Smugglers spent a lot of time touring in the Deep South. We, for whatever reason, found an audience there, so we would play with the Subsonics and Manor Astro Man and the Woggles and Southern Culture on the Skids. We just thought all these bands were just the coolest.
Oh yeah.
And we would play cool little bars like the Chucker in Tuscaloosa. Can't remember the name of the place in Huntsville. It was called like Spaceland or something like that. And like, yeah, it was amazing. And but again, like Manor Astro Man got quite big out of that scene, probably the biggest of any of them. But I remember we were all about like, we were almost like a crack commando unit of a band, and we'd never want anyone to be bored. We'd never want anyone to be standing around. So we could set up our stuff in like record time and be on stage. You wanted half an hour, you'd get half an hour. We'd try to be airborne the entire show. You wanted 45 minutes, you get exactly 45 minutes, whatever. And I remember as Manor Astro Man got bigger and bigger and bigger, and their stage show expanded, they would take forever to set up. And I'd be like, man, you are killing the vibe. Get that shit up there and set it up faster. Plug in those weird 1970s TVs and video game consoles faster.
Yeah.
But so we parted ways with them, amicably when we went the Lookout route, and they went, what they sign after Estrus? Touch and Go or something?
Touch
like
and
that?
Go. Touch and Go. Yeah.
And then so they went that route, and our paths didn't really cross again until Brian ended up on Lookout with Servotron.
Yeah.
And that was another weird, that was when Lookout started going like all over the place in a million different directions. And unfortunately, that worked for Sub Pop, diversifying. Like they hit it. Everyone thought, oh, Sub Pop's going to die if they stray away from grunge. But two of their biggest all-time records with Sub Pop are the Shins and the Postal Service.
Yeah.
Like I think they're in like the top 4 or something like that. Whereas when Lookout diverted from pop punk, it started to go down, unfortunately.
Yeah. How much of a mind blower was it seeing Larry Livermore on a documentary about marijuana growers in California?
Yeah, the Sasquatch one or Bigfoot or whatever it was.
Bigfoot or whatever it was. Yeah,
that was awesome. I got notified of that, I think, through the Lookout Facebook group, and I'm like, oh, I got to see this. And it was great seeing them, and not even like no mention at all of music, or I don't think there was. No. I think it was just like former residents, Spy Rock Road.
Mhm.
And I'm like, little do they know who they have here,
I
you
went
know?
inside unseen watching that, and I was sitting with my wife. We're taking all this in, thinking we're gonna get a Bigfoot documentary, and it's
Right.
anything but. And then it cuts to Larry Livermore, and I grab my wife. I'm like, "Babe, do you know who that is?" No, but I bet you do." "Yeah, that's that's the guy who owned Lookout Records." She's like,
Yeah,
"Yeah, I don't even know what that is."
I know. It was hilarious. That show was a little iffy.
Yeah,
Um, but it was entertaining seeing Larry in it for sure.
I think that saved it for me, actually,
Yeah.
to be honest.
This sounds like it should be a podcast and it's a TV show.
Yeah, that's legitimately what it should have been, just like a
Like a
couple part podcast, and
yeah,
then
like a true crime kind of like, because it wasn't the premise that two guys have been ripped apart by Bigfoot or something like that. It was
yeah,
so weird.
yeah,
Anyway, entertaining, but just for Larry.
yeah, pretty much. And, you make it on Lookout all the way until 2004,
I know
2005,
we went a
right?
long way. Uh, we went 10 years on Lookout, and probably I remember our final record, like Lookout was kind of bleeding out in the 2000s, and Rosie did really well. That took us like right around the world. It was quite incredible. Rosie was our follow up to Selling the Sizzle, and it did quite well for us. It took us to like Australia for the first time, New Zealand, Japan. I remember it was a sold out tour in Japan, which blew our minds. But then after that, the label really diversified, and like kind of the golden years was when we would do like a CMJ music marathon um, showcase, and the
Yeah,
bands were like the Queers, the Mr. T Experience, the Smugglers, Pansy Division, Cub, and the Groovy Ghoulies, and at Coney Island High, or the Donnas in there too. And there would be like, it would be completely packed, and Joey Ramone would be there, and Lemmy one time was there, Lint from Rancid, and we would be like rubbernecking, going like, "Oh my god, this is unbelievable!
yeah,
Like, is Joey Ramone gonna see us play?" and stuff like that. And then the label really started to diversify in the 2000s when we were still on the record label, but they got another hit with Ted Leo,
yeah,
and he did well for them, thank God. Like, he was floating the boat in the 2000s. The Smugglers never floated the Lookout boat. We were just like along for the ride, and but we were great at parties. And but then there was a whole bunch of other bands that just didn't quite click. There was like the Oranges bands, and Pretty Girls Make Graves, I think, did pretty well in
yeah,
that
they
kind
did.
of white belt, sort of post-punk, jagged kind of hot heat style.
Yep.
But it just was like those showcases were no longer was the backstage. It's like a full on party with everyone loving everyone. People were kind of keeping to their own cliques, and the Smugglers were considered kind of like these old guys, and it just didn't quite have that camaraderie feel that it did from just a few years earlier. And then I remember we put out one final record with Lookout, which turned out to be our final album, called Mutiny in
Mutiny in
Stereo.
Stereo, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's such a good record in my
Oh,
opinion. I
thanks.
love
I
that
mean,
record so much.
almost nobody's heard it, because I kind of had to. I remember I sort of had to beg Chris Applegren to put it out. He was like, "Grant, I don't know if we can afford this. I don't know what it's going to do. Are you going to tour it?" And I convinced him to do it. And it did end up, it came out on like at least a couple of labels. I think Screaming Apple got back in the picture and released it on vinyl. And then Mint in Canada, Lookout in the States. So it was all set up to do well. But then we went on a couple of tours for it, and Dave, our guitarist, finally started to burn out. And after just maybe 3 or 4 months after Mutiny in Stereo came out, he pulled the plug on the band. And I was in shock, because I had been in the band since I was like 16 years old,
Yeah.
and with Dave. And Dave just hit burnout. He had quit the Evaporators maybe a couple of years earlier. That could have been writing on the wall. But the irony is, Dave, to this day, is the only full-time touring musician out of the 5 Smugglers. He's still in the band Destroyer, like a art rock Matador Records band.
Yep.
And he still tours like all over the world with them. So maybe he just burnt out on the minivan garage rock scene or the pop punk scene, whatever.
But he may have continued with playing music per se, but you still stayed in that sphere, did you not? Like in broadcasting?
Yeah, I got the job at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is like your NPR, but a little bit more like maybe it crosses over a little bit more into Canadian culture. Like everyone has the CBC. It's particularly important in rural or far reaching areas of Canada. And I remember the Smugglers had kind of an off year in the mid 90s when one of the members was unexpectedly going to become a dad. And we had to take some time off, and we all relied on the Smugglers by then for, to pay our rents. And I suddenly needed a job, and I had been working at Mint Records, but then I ended up getting offered a job at CBC as a researcher, which is like the lowest rung of the ladder. And I just took it. And I ended up working there while being in the Smugglers for like the next several years. And I still work at the CBC. I host a show called the CBC Music Top 20, which is like a national countdown show, like a kind of Casey Kasem type thing. And I've been there now for 25 years.
Wow.
So it's a little shocking because it was kind of like, I thought it was going to be like a stopgap just to kind of until the Smugglers got going again. And then the Smugglers did get going, but I kept that job. And it was cool because I had a really amazing boss that would let me tour. I just basically hung my coat on my chair at work and put a cup of coffee on my desk and then just made sure like I did a late night show, like midnight to 4 a.m. at that time. And as long as those were all pre-taped and I had to trust this one person at work to drop them off to master control, put them in this little shelf, these 2 DAT tapes once a week. As long as those tapes were in there and the show went to air, it was okay. So, and that was like, I think that was like I remember that was the year 2000 when Rosie came out. I was away the entire month of March and April on a Donna's tour, and then came back for like a week at the end of April, then turned around and went away again for 3 weeks to Japan, Australia, New Zealand. How I kept the job, I don't know, but
that was right when the Donnas were like popping off.
The Donnas were, I just actually did some interviews with that new book, Sellout. I forget the name of Dan Ozzie, I think is the name of the author.
Dan Ozzie, yeah.
Ozzie, okay. And that book is about, cool bands or indie bands that made the leap to the major label and how it went. And it's not always the case, but it's often like the coolest period of a band's career is that white hot period right before they end up on the major label.
Yep.
And not always, like not so much for, I guess you could argue it, but I was going to say not so much for Green Day, but people could make the argument that Kerplunk was like the high water mark. But obviously Dookie was a huge record. One of the biggest of all time. And but the Donnas, we were touring with them for the Hot Pink record. I think it was called Get Skin Tight.
Yep.
And they were absolutely like, it was incredible being on that tour in the spring of 2000. Man, that's 22 years ago. But to be on a tour that started on the West Coast and went to the East Coast and then wrapped back, and to see the shows get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as they headed towards this huge show that we played with them in New York with Joan Jett. And it was one of those tours that you kind of read about where like the shows are going so well, they have to bump them up to a larger venue, like as we're rolling. And again, Forrest Gump, like Smugglers were just along for the ride, and we got to make the most of it. And I mean, one of our tricks of our trade was to get a middle slot on a big tour and then kind of try to steal the show.
Yeah.
With like charisma and moves. And you can if you're given 40 minutes or 30 minutes, you can deliver a lot in that period of time, as opposed to a headlining set, which is often stretched out over an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Where that failed for us, like at the clubs, it totally worked. We would take advantage of doing that middle slot. Everyone's fresh. They're at a good energy level. They're open. A lot of people in clubs and theaters and stuff like that, they're really open to discover new bands. Where it failed was the rare time we ever did a show like in an arena or a stadium.
Mm-hmm.
Truly, they don't care about the opening bands. Like that sort of more suburban, fair weather crowd who are just there for to hear the couple of the hit songs. They do not care about the openers. And so we're like, wow, the charm is not working in these rooms. We need that compression of a smaller place where we can steal the show. So we learned a lot about all that. And we not that we were, I remember, Pansy Division went out with Green Day and they were just like assaulted, like with Garbage, and High Fives got it too. And, so we're like, okay, because by then Green Day was like fully just like mall rock, like suburban kids. And they didn't understand that Green Day came from, 924 Gilman Street and a punk scene that was very open and accepting. It's crazy to think that Pansy Division would be bottled. Like now it would be like an outrage.
Of course it would.
It was still an outrage when it happened in the 90s, but and Green Day would go out and lecture the kids, but they were just like from, like they were from like Bronxville, New York, and up in, up the train tracks or whatever, right? Like whatever you call that neck of the woods, like all the kids that just take the trains into New York, you know what I mean?
Yeah, the bridge and tunnel kids.
Yeah, and they weren't cultured enough to understand a band like Pansy Division. So anyway, it was interesting to see what worked and what didn't through all those years. But yeah, that Donna's tour, I remember just looking at their guest list every night. Like it was always filled with celebrities. And then the promoter would be like, do you have a guest list? And I'd be like, yeah, here's our guest list. And it'd be like a guy named Steve. and Donna's would be like half the cast of Saturday Night Live, the members of Anthrax, the members of the Ramones. And it was like, we were even embarrassed about our guest list. I was like, is there anyone famous we could put on our guest list? Blair Buscarino from the teen scene? I don't know. But yeah. Dave the Spaz from WFMU radio? Maybe.
That'd be beautiful. You got to kind of like see it from a point of view where you don't get wrecked by it all, though, which I think is important because like you guys didn't get into like the hard partying of it all. No,
to be frank and honest about it, and I talk about this in my book Dirty Windshields about the Smugglers and the tours. I realized once things got going well, like in the early years, we would have to just beg for any sort of hospitality or a drink at the bar or whatever. And then once we started doing well and we would get what is called a rider, we would get like almost to an excess. Like every single night, there'd be 24 beers on ice waiting for us and more if we wanted it. The Donnas, I remember they had 2 bottles of Jack Daniels, 26ers of Jack Daniels. Like no human being can knock. And the tour is 7 days a week. I remember on the Donnas tour, we'd have 1 night off every 2 weeks. And that's hard. And I challenge you to name another job anywhere in the world where you have an expectation when you show up to work. You've got someone saying, hey, where's all our stuff? It's supposed to be here in the backstage, and who shows up to work to 24 beers on ice and is not only allowed to consume them before you do your work, but sometimes encouraged to consume them.
Yep.
And so that can be a really slippery slope for addiction and alcoholism. Because, if you're doing this every single night, like I remember we would get home from tour and we would a couple of the guys would have the shakes going I just did, 6 weeks of drinking every single night straight. And they get home to a family or get home to an apartment and go where's the booze? Where's the booze? Where's the booze? And so I would say at least 2 of the Smugglers came out of our career with what I would define as alcoholism. And I've had to deal with it. I'm surprised it wasn't all 5 of us, to some degree. And I battle it too. I have to even to this day, I have to go, okay, nothing on the weekdays.
Yeah.
But it was crazy, to have, I remember that Jack Daniels just made everyone insane.
Oh yeah. You should have a lawyer on retainer the second a bottle of Jack Daniels enters a room.
Yeah. I remember Nick would run out into traffic and be throwing garbage cans over the hoods of cars. And I mean, what is going on? Get back over here. We were playing some club in Houston called Fitzgerald's, and it was right on the interstate highway. So 8 lanes. And of course our motel was on the other side. And to actually get to it, you'd have to drive a bit and then go back on the byway on the other side. But oh no, Nick is just going to go right across 8 lanes of traffic on foot at night, wasted. And oh man. Anyway, we all lived to tell the tale, thank God.
Yeah, and you avoided the pills and powders, I guess, was what I was trying.
We did, yeah. I mean, the only totally honestly, the only time we saw the pills and the powders was when we went to Spain. Really? And yeah, we never, I guess it was around remember when we toured with the Queers, Joe was in recovery, very cranky, the lead singer.
Yeah, I know Joe well.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
He's one of my friends, and he's been through a lot. He soldiers on. I give him a lot of credit. I think he's a great songwriter. Some of his songs sometimes detour into I don't know what you're thinking, but he's got a total knack for pop melody and everything else. He's very talented, but he has his demons and he's battled. But on the tours that we did with the Queers, we didn't see anything like that. And he was always clean when he was with us. And then cranky but clean.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've played numerous shows with the Queers with my band, and I have to tell you, Joe's still cranky, but he's still not doing anything. He's still clean.
Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, he's like, hey, what the fuck is with this place?
Yep.
Oh my God, yeah, just get it together, man. But I mean, if he has literally chosen a life where he plays in rooms that where the predominant smell is a urinal puck.
Yeah.
His whole life. And so I give him a lot of credit. And the pandemic was really tough on him because he's alive. That's his income.
Yep.
And but it was when we went to Spain where we would go into the backstage and there'd be a crazy spread there, but there would also be a pile of white powder. And I'd be totally naive. I'm like, what is that salt? Do we go like this over the oysters or whatever? And Nick was like, no, that's either cocaine or speed. And I'm like, what? And what are we supposed to do with it? And well, I guess we're supposed to do it before the show. And we wouldn't, but I later found out that a couple of the guys did try it because they knew I would be totally against it and wouldn't allow it. But a couple of the guys tried it on the side. And I remember another band, some friends of ours went to Spain and they just totally dove in like head first into this whole cocaine and speed culture there. And I remember the drummer, he had his while blasted on speed, he had his passport and wallet stolen by a hooker while he was just completely out of it. And so, just lessons to keep your wits about you and don't do drugs while you're on the road. But I know it was around us. I think people kind of knew that we were a beer only band.
Mhm.
So they kind of kept it away from us.
See, yeah, you guys never really had that reputation for being like a hard
No,
like drug partying band. Whereas
no,
bands like
no,
Rocket from the Crypt kind of like they kind of had a reputation for that, but they weren't as bad as people made them out to be, quite
well,
honestly.
I a lot of this stuff I found out after the fact. I was like, they were doing what? They did what? Like I remember Luis from Pansy Division, who's completely clean now and has been for like, I think he just hit his 25-year mark or something like that of sobriety. He was doing stuff while on the road with us that I had no idea. And he told me later, I was like, when did you do that? When did you snort that? And he goes, when you weren't looking. And I'm like, why do people keep these things from me? But I wrote tour diaries at the time too. And people, I was posting them online. And that was basically my first taste of having other people read what I write. And they got pretty popular. And I remember musicians that were touring with us were worried about what I would write because I really would almost tell everything.
Mhm.
If I saw it happening, I would write about it in the tour diary.
Like an actual journalist. I mean, that's basically what journalism is. You're writing what you see and experience.
Right.
And is that what led to the book essentially?
Yeah. I mean, my dad actually, he was very conservative and he was very against the Smugglers even existing. He thought that forming a band and trying to make a go of it was like just a suicidal, financially suicidal, and that I might as well just, flush my life down the toilet, blah, 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 blah. He's always worked hard and he's a self-made guy, all this stuff, engineer. And he just was like, you couldn't have picked a worse career. And, I mean, you could argue, but, you follow your muse and you follow your passion and what you want to do. And I joined a band and I ended up seeing a large part of the world and had a really, really great time doing it and have put out a bunch of records. And we're still, you and I are still talking about it to this day. So I have no regrets. But my dad made me make a deal with him. And he said something along the lines of, look, if you insist on flushing your life down the economic toilet that is the music business, at least promise me that you will write the misery down. And I said, okay, what do you mean by that? And he goes, keep a diary of your shows and whatever you do, just keep a diary. So I said, well, if that's the deal that will get him off my back and stop hassling me, I can do that. So I've got them like here in this room over here, starting from the very first show. I would get home from the very first show, which were these Nardwar all ages shows, and I would just write a page out about what happened at the show. And so I started doing that, and I never stopped doing it. And there was the odd tour where it would fall off or whatever, but for the majority of the Smugglers' 15 years on the road, I kept detailed tour diaries. And for the longest time, like most diaries, you just think you're writing to yourself. So you're very honest. I wasn't holding anything back because I'm not going to lie to myself in silence while writing.
Yeah.
But then then the internet came along, and I remember the guys at Mint Records were looking, essentially it's the same thing that people look for to this day. They were looking for content to put on their website. And they knew that I kept the tour diaries because I had done a few tours. I think maybe we had made a zine out of some of them. We stapled together a little tour zine and we're selling them at shows. And one of the guys said, "Why don't we put this on the Mint Records website?" So we started putting the tour diaries on the website. And then from there, it just went, we just started hearing about them everywhere. And that was my first sort of glimpse of the power of the internet, that like you stick something up there and, you know, it's like sticking up a poster in, you know, Grand Central Station. Like a lot of people are going to see that poster.
Yeah.
Not many people are going to stop and read it, but the ones that do are going to remember whatever. And we would hear about these tour diaries, and then the guys, you know, some fan would come up to Dave and say, "So you actually shit your pants in, you know, Winnipeg, the backstage of the club?" And Dave would be like, "What? How did you know that?" And like, "Oh, I read about it in the tour diaries." And he'd be like, "Oh my God." And then, or like, you know, somebody like Nick, "Oh, you slept with that girl and, you know, in wherever, Chicago." "Oh God, yes, but how do you know this?" And so then I just kept them all, and over the years, and then I always kind of knew that I wanted to publish some sort of rock and roll story, because I found that, you know, like with that Forrest Gump theme, like we had weaved our way through so many incredible scenes and had been on so many amazing shows, played with so many great bands, that I just wanted to somehow capture it all. And so for me, the best way of writing about it was using the tour diaries as sort of the backbone, and then filling in the culture and the stories on all the stuff that happened around it. And a lot of what Dirty Windshields, the book, is, it focuses a lot on the Smugglers' first ever US tour, which was in 1992. And it was like this was like before Lookout, before In the Hall of Fame. Like I think it was just on our first album, which was a 10-inch vinyl.
Yep.
And very obscure. But we ended up getting a bunch of great shows, played with Reverend Horton Heat, like the first couple of shows after the Rodney King riots in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's a lot for kids from Canada to take in.
Yeah.
Like LA was just still on fire, and the air reeked, and broken glass everywhere. And, you know, that city just shut down for like 10 days and everyone hid. And then our gigs, tons of gigs got canceled. And our gig was one of the first. It was in May of 92. And we did 2 shows back to back with Reverend Horton Heat, and it was amazing. So, and Elvez was on the bill. We met him for the first time, and still friends with him. And yeah, so just great times. And so I chronicle a lot of that tour, because oftentimes the first time you experience something is, for me anyway, the most interesting. It's like, and there was the most culture shock.
Yeah.
I remember in San Francisco, you know, Canada is a pretty protected place, and up until just like the last couple of years, we've all kind of gotten along.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, there's been a little bit more division, you know, mirroring what's going on in the States.
Sadly,
But,
yes.
Sadly. But in the States, I was like, whoa, there are certain scenes that are really divided.
Yeah.
And I remember it was in San Francisco, early 90s. And like we saw, I think it was like these black guys surround a skinhead in the parking lot of a Safeway, like a grocery store. And we were like, oh my God, what is going on? And the skinhead had a chain and was whipping it around, trying to hold them back. And the guys got a hold of him, and they threw him through. They threw the skinhead through like a plate glass window of Safeway, like the kind of thing you would see like in a movie.
Yeah.
except it was real, and the glass didn't like shatter into tiny pieces. It shattered into these like crazy jagged, and the guy was just covered in blood, and we were like, let's get it, we got to get out of here. So we saw just unbelievable stuff, and a lot of racial tension that we had never experienced in our lives. And just to be a fly on the wall for that was very fascinating for us as a band. And we played a lot of empty shows on that first tour, but it changed our lives, that's for sure.
And now, like, looking back on it, how does it feel to have, this record getting reissued after all this time and on vinyl nonetheless?
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing when it came out on CD. Pop Lama was like, no, we're not going to do vinyl because it would have to be a double vinyl and we can't fit it. And I was really choked because we were a vinyl band, and I was kind of against CDs, and I was like, I want to be purist. And I thought the CD was just yet another music industry scam to just buy the same records over again. And if you think about the music industry, like the music industry at large, that is incredibly clever at getting us to buy the same records over and over and over and over again on different formats or reissues or whatever, and even to a degree in the Hall of Fame, because a lot of people have it on CD. Now you have a chance to have it on vinyl in this whole package. So hey, I'm part of it. I'm part of the hustle.
Yeah, but the fact is this is like a treat for the fans. I don't feel like I'm being hustled, and I think this would be my third copy of that.
Oh wow.
Because I had happened upon one on Mint or I'm on Lama Records, was it?
Pop Lama
were they the ones who put it on CD first?
They were the ones who released it first. Yeah. So Mint probably sold it through their mail order.
Yeah. So I had two different copies of it on CD, and the color qualities of the covers are different, so I could tell them apart just by holding them. Oh wait, but I'm a psychopath with this stuff. So for me to have finally coming from a completist standpoint, having all of the records on vinyl, this gets to sit right there with all the other ones. So that's big thrill for me.
That's the same for us too. I mean, we're thrilled, and it all came about through the Lookout Records Facebook group, where a lot of cool people do stuff, and there's a lot of good ideas that come from it. It's a cool community. And a guy who played for a short while in the Smugglers, he took over for Bees for a little while, named Jeffy McCloy. He's also in the Transmitters and a few other bands. And he said, hey, you should, one of these days, somebody should reissue in the Hall of Fame. It's your only record to never come out on vinyl, in this Facebook group. And I commented and said, yeah, I know, but I don't ever see that happening. And then this amazing guy from Lava Sox Records, he stepped up and said, I'll do it. I'm like, really? And so he's doing it, and I can't, as Alex Botkin is his name. And he actually, I give him a lot of credit because he actually got the Smugglers back together in 2017 after like 13 or 14 years of not playing. He invited us to play the Gilman Street's 30th anniversary. And it turned out we built it up into kind of a Lookout Records night, and we played that, and the Smugglers ended up doing about another 5 or 6 shows over the next couple of years, promoting the book a lot. And but yeah, so Alex got us back together and is now reissuing this record that will complete our vinyl catalog. So it's really, really cool.
I would just, for the world at large, I have them all, but for people who don't have some of these records, which you're gonna pay a lot of money on Discogs for, if someone were to come forward and just start reissuing all of them, but that would be a rights nightmare more than likely. No,
no, not really. Like, Pop Lama, the rights went back to us, and then all the rights of all the Lookout stuff, it's all gone back to us. But it's just like the only one that other stuff is out there and you can find it, but it was this one that was like a missing piece. And what was cool was that I was able to kind of reform our team in a way. Like Chris Imlay, who I mentioned earlier, he did the design of the gatefold from the high fives. He's a brilliant graphic designer. And so it was great to be working with him again. And then we got brought in Master Genie, who is responsible for producing our the Smugglers' biggest selling record, which is Selling the Sizzle.
Mm-hmm.
He's still very involved in mastering and producing. So he remastered in the Hall of Fame and brought all the levels. Like the so funny, like the levels were so low on the CD. So he beefed those up for the vinyl. And then Nico Case, who, you know, was in Cub way back when and is now a star in her own right with lots of Grammy nominations and stuff. She, you know, she retooled the cover and gets credit for that. So it was just like this cool group effort that came together of friends, creative friends that came together to all get this out there again, you know? And so now, of course, we've gone past the release date and I don't have the vinyl in my hands.
Yeah, I mean, I'm waiting for mine still too, but
yeah, like this classic, you know, supply chain thing. But I sold those pre-orders and we got a lot of pre-orders from all over the world. But my sales pitch was like, the platter will be on your turntable by Christmas.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to Alex saying, hey man, I got to make good on that. Like, I mean, this Christmas, not next Christmas. But obviously this, like, ever since
out of his
COVID,
hands. It's out of his hands. Believe me, everybody's waiting for everything. It's scary. It's scary.
It is. But he says he's going to get it to everyone by Christmas. So hopefully that will be the case. We've had a great, I mean, I swear to God, we've probably sold more pre-orders than we did of the actual record when it came out the first time around within like the first 6 months. That record took a while to catch on. So it's been exciting seeing the reaction and seeing people. I mean, it's funny when we started analyzing and looking at the songs on In the Hall of Fame, we realized that a lot of them carried over into the Lookout area as like staples of our set for years and years. So it's we're excited and we can't wait. And we hope that it will be our Christmas gift and your Christmas gift and a lot of our friends and family and fans Christmas gifts for them too.
Since we hit the ground running, I only ever ask one question. I only have one question that I have predetermined walking into it. I usually just free form my way through conversations because it just feels more fresh that way to me.
Right.
The one question I always ask is, what is it that terrifies you on an existential level? Because that seems to level all of us out.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
Well, probably anything happening to my kids. I mean, what do you mean on an existential level? Like
what is it that plagues you about your own existence on this planet? Like it could be anything.
Well, yeah. I mean, ever since I became a parent, it's just like the protection of the kids and like, you know, nightmares of things going wrong or something impacting either of them. And before that, it was like, you know, selfish stuff, you know, like maybe me getting sick or not making the gig, or, you know, my most common nightmare, which I still get to this day, is it's either forgetting Smugglers' lyrics or not somehow not making it to the gig. And I am proud to say that the Smugglers made it to every gig without fail, no matter what. Like wind, rain, sleet, or snow, like nothing stopped us from making it to the gig. But I still have these nightmares of not making it. But those aren't legitimate fears. The legitimate fears would be, yeah, anything threatening the kids.
Yeah, I mean I think that's pretty universal.
Yeah.
But it seems to me like no matter what you ask someone in that arena, it always has to do with either their family or something even like far reaching, like like the infinite or things of that nature freak them out. So you're a more grounded person.
Yeah, I don't worry about like, I don't worry about like, I can't do anything about, if Putin decides to push the button and take out Seattle or whatever. I can't do anything about that. I mean, I can be prepared. I can have a full tank of gas and, some supplies ready and head up to Desolation Sound where we have a cabin.
Yeah.
But other than that, like, I don't worry about that too much. I read all the papers. I read all the news, and I'm very up to date on what's happening. But in lots in Canada and the United States and around the world, but if you let all of that get to you, you go off the deep end.
You're not living at that point. You're just anxious about the world.
Yeah, and I think we all saw in the pandemic that it brought out the extremes in a lot of people, and whether the extreme was, to the right or to the left, it brought out a lot of extremity, and I lost friends. Everybody lost a couple of friends for whatever reason. And I'm not talking about like dying. I'm talking about like going off some, I got one guy on one side who's like extreme left and thinking all the kids should be held back, out of school, the whole deal. And then I've got other friends who think, oh, this is a worldwide hoax. So, and I still notice I do still call them friends because I keep thinking like, well, this will all settle down. But so it's been tough on everybody. And I just try to like mentally try to think like, you can't solve the world's problems. You can help, and every little thing helps. But I always like to have something to look forward to, something creative. I'm an artist.
Yeah.
So I like writing books. I like putting out podcasts. I like putting out records, and I like having audiences, and I like people clapping. So if I have something like that to look forward to, then that's one of my goals in life, is looking at the calendar and what do we have to look forward to.
Yeah. That's pretty beautiful, actually. And I think that's what we were kind of missing for some of the pandemic.
Oh, I totally agree.
What the pandemic had done for me was twofold. I'm lucky in this manner. I'm 46 and I have a 3-year-old son. So for his really formative year and a half there, I got to be home the whole time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And my wife was getting sick of my milling and moping around the house and said, listen, I know you're not playing music right now. You're a good bullshit artist. Why don't you do a podcast? That'll never work. No one's going to want to watch this. Here I am, second season, and we're cruising along. So
that's awesome.
It was a fruitful pandemic for me.
Yeah, well, that's wicked. Well, congratulations on that. And so what is your band?
We're called Heart Out. We're like a traditional hardcore punk band.
Oh, cool.
Kind of akin to Gorilla Biscuits or something like that, with a little more Rolling Stones influence.
Oh, wow. So you got a really wide musical taste.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's great.
But, it stands to reason, because when I'd first heard the Smugglers, like my favorite bands were bands like Gorilla Biscuits and Judge and Bold and all that like straight edge hardcore stuff. And then I heard that and I was like, wait, I still like Social Distortion and the Replacements too.
Yeah.
And then
Melody is always
Morrissey.
good.
You had a song about Morrissey.
That's
and
right.
I was like, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a true story, that song. But you mentioned Gorilla Biscuits. It reminds me of this joke that Nardwar. Do you know? I keep mentioning Nardwar.
I know exactly who Nardwar is. Yes.
So he had this. He likes to kind of tap into zeitgeisty things, and he started noticing that there was a lot of bands with gorilla in the name.
Yeah.
So there was a band called Gorilla, and they were from like I think Seattle, and then there was a band called from Winnipeg. They were called Gorilla Gorilla.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a band called the famous Gorilla Biscuits.
Mm-hmm.
And so Nardwar's dream was to put on a gig with all of them so that the poster would read Gorilla, 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 Gorilla Biscuits. I mean, like, just for the poster. You wanted to just see that. But then I'd be like, but Nardwar, Gorilla Biscuits, they would be the headliner. It wouldn't work. It would be like Gorilla Biscuit. And you go, no. We'd put them at the bottom for sure. And just for the flow, and also like just to expose how ridiculous it is. Like I remember in around 2004, 5, 6, every band and their grandmother used the animal wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was Wolf Parade, and there was AIDS Wolf, and there was oh god, I can't remember the Australian wolf band, but it was just like there was about 15 bands with wolf in their name. And it's true that these zeitgeisty things happen where people kind of get on the same wavelength and they think the same, and they all put it out into the world kind of at the same time, and then kind of go, oh, I can't believe it. Wolf Parade, did I mention that?
Peanut Butter Wolf, the rapper.
There you go.
There was like so many of them. You're
so
absolutely
many. Right. And then there was an Australian band that probably did the biggest with Wolf. I guess Wolf Parade was probably the biggest, but it was crazy. It was ridiculous. So Nardwar and I always make fun of that kind of stuff.
I have to ask about Nardwar. Is he really that like zany in real life, or is that?
Oh, totally.
Good.
I think, in my opinion, like these days, we're probably like overdiagnosed and overprescribed, and you hear like Spectrum all the time, and maybe that's a good thing. You know, it helps people out. It helps people sort through what's going on in their heads. And back in high school, we went to high school with Nardwar. He was just considered the wacky guy. And these days, like if he was in high school today, I'm pretty sure he would be, diagnosed as being on a autistic spectrum, because he is just one of the most interesting, infuriating, funny, brilliant, stubborn, talented, crazy people that I've ever met in my entire life. Like just a true original. And I'm very, very happy for him because he's a misfit. Misfits, he doesn't quite fit into society, but he has carved this niche out for himself that's totally DIY, where he just does his celebrity interviews. He's found this bizarre, happy place with hip hop.
Yeah. And
he can put out an interview. There's going to be an interview. It might even be live already with that singer Lizzo. And he'll get 1 million views in like 12 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like stratospheric, and every single one, and he's monetized that, and he lives off that.
It's incredible to me too, how diametrically opposed the people he interviews
I know.
are too, because they either fucking hate him or they absolutely love him. Like Henry Rollins hates him.
Yeah. Well, but the thing is though, is what we call that like the Nardwar arc. Way back, I mean, we all used to help him film the interviews, and we would see like these people just hating on him and just wanting to get away from him. But Nardwar was so persistent. But then over time, they kind of realized like they'd see him again the next time they were through town. And then by like the third or fourth time, this weird thing would happen where they'd be like, hey, Nardwar, like people that truly hated him the first time. By the third or fourth time, they kind of realized what we all in our scene already knew, that he was like incredible and a genius, and everything was coming from the heart.
Yeah.
And so like Courtney Love, like the first time he interviewed her, it was a disaster.
Yeah, I remember that one.
And then like 4, 5, 6 years later, she's like hugging him, trying to make out with him. And so and then we also have this thing called the Nardwar litmus test. And if someone like truly does not get along with Nardwar and thinks Nardwar is an idiot, chances are that person is actually the idiot, because Nardwar is a really, really special, amazing guy, and you just have to strap yourself in and go with it and just ride his brain and ride his thought pattern out. Because if you go against the tide, that's when the problems start. But there's a million amazing Nardwar stories. There was a guy from Blur, and I can't remember which guy, but it was the guy with the glasses in Blur. And he was really nasty to Nardwar in the Blur interview, to the point where he got in between Nardwar and Damon Albarn, and this guy actually grabbed Nardwar's interview cards, ripped them up, and then assaulted Nardwar, like took his glasses off, hit him a few times. And then years later, after Blur broke up, this guy from Blur ended up running for Parliament, for government office in England. And this video came up to haunt him, saying like, how can we trust this guy to be our member of Parliament if this is what he does to nerds? And they showed this video, and this guy was so, and it kind of caught fire, and people were like, yeah, what's this? You bully people, you're a bully. And that word has such strength these days. Yeah. And he was totally caught, and Nardwar didn't know any of this was going on. And one day he got like this full open apology from the guy from Blur, who said, dear Nardwar, I'm so sorry for beating you up and all this stuff. And then goes on to like into this too much information stuff, saying like, back then I was a full blown cokehead and I didn't know what I was doing. And I just want to apologize. And Nardwar just wrote back on, yeah, no worries. Don't worry about it. Like, don't, apology accepted, whatever. And the guy ended up becoming elected, and I think he's still an MP to this day.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just these crazy Nardwar stories, You
have to think though, like he probably actually gave that guy a venue to exercise some demons that he was hanging on to,
Yeah, I'm just gonna quickly Nardwar Blur guy. It does not immediately. David Roundtree. That was
David Roundtree. Okay.
Yeah. There it is. Blur's David Roundtree apologizes for 2003 attack against Nardwar. I mean, you can't make this kind of stuff up, but it's crazy.
That litmus test that you just mentioned, I had it and didn't realize I'd had it, because he changed my mind about Henry Rollins, about Kid Cudi, about when he did the Courtney Love interview. It was Courtney Love and Lydia Lunch, or was Lydia Lunch with someone else? I'm trying to remember. No, Lydia Lunch was with from Sonic Youth, Kim Gordon. Changed my mind about those two, like, because they were just
in what way?
Just how awful they were to him.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, this guy it's obvious he's just who he is, and he's not trying to take the piss out of you or anything you're thinking,
But to a person, they've all come around. Like Kim Gordon came around on Nardwar, Thurston Moore came around on Nardwar. Like they've all, I think to an extent, even Henry Rollins, but I mean, him and Nardwar, they had a pretty good rhythm. And to a little bit, like Henry Rollins was kind of playing the cantankerous, grumpy guy. Because I remember filming one of those Henry Rollins interviews, and Henry Rollins was like just not having it. But Nardwar had all these questions, and eventually Henry Rollins had to admit, like, he couldn't believe the amount of research that had been done.
Yeah.
And he had to give Nardwar credit. And then one of Nardwar's questions was, Henry Rollins, is it true that your cock is the shape of a soup can? like a Campbell's chunky soup can. And Henry Rollins' reaction was just like shock and wouldn't answer the question, and was like, I don't know where you heard that. Like, why would you even ask me that? Like, what is wrong with you? And then later on in the interview, Nardwar dropped his interview cards. They fell on Henry Rollins' lap, and Nardwar's scooping them off his lap. And then Henry Rollins says, "Hey, hands off the soup can." So, I mean, there's like, it was an awesome, what do you call that? Like,
pithy repartee they had.
Yeah, like a great callback, and shows that, Henry Rollins is kind of going with the rhythm, but these days, everyone lines up to get interviewed by Nardwar, and, he's getting pitched constantly. And like, if you're a hip hop artist or a rapper, it's like a rite of passage to get interviewed by Nardwar. And so there isn't so much of that guerrilla style of journalism anymore. Everybody knows who he is and wants to be interviewed because his numbers are absolutely crazy huge. They all want to get the Nardwar treatment, like get the gifts and get the crazy "this is your life" research, and soup can cock questions and all that kind of stuff.
You've led such an incredibly interesting life just with the proximity to these amazing people. Your high school must have been something special.
It was. And just last night I do a kind of a laid back touring show, and it's even got a laid back name. It's called Grant Lawrence and Friends, an Evening of Stories and Songs. And I read stories from my books, and then musician friends will play songs between, and some of them are from the punk scene, but most of it is solo acoustic.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guys last night was a guy from an alternative band from Vancouver called the Grapes of Wrath. That
I remember them.
Yeah, like they're a pop band. They were kind of jangle pop, kind of like a cross between the Beatles and like Jesus and the Mary Chain or something like that. And I love them because Nardwar booked them to play our high school dance in like 1985 when I was, 14 or 13 or something like that. And seeing them and seeing a band of that impressionable age play our high school has a huge, huge impact. And Nardwar, when he took over leadership of our high school as the high school president, he canceled all the discos, which was and he would just book bands, cool punk bands like DOA and the Modernettes, or pop bands like Grapes of Wrath, or a ska band or whatever. And so a generation of musicians came out of that school, the Evaporators, the Smugglers, and a whole bunch of other bands. There was I remember a new wave band called Fourth Floor, and they actually did really well. They were the first band from our high school to put out their own vinyl record. And there was a whole bunch of them. And a lot of that credit goes back to Nardwar. And you're right. Like I have been very lucky to have these sort of unique characters that are, in the underground, in the music underground, that often are so talented at what they do. They burst through, like Larry Livermore, like Nardwar. And I mean, there's others as well. I remember on the Donna's tour, this guy was a super creepy guy, but I met Kim Fowley.
You met Kim Fowley. That is, he's a weirdo at a level that Jazz Coleman from Killing Joke couldn't be that weird.
Yeah, he came to the New Orleans show of like all shows at this cool place called the Shim Sham Club right in the French Quarter. And the guy walked in, and there was this kind of spotlight at the front door. And I remember Kim Fowley, he was like 6'6", and he was wearing a bright, like blood red two-piece suit, white, like silk shirt, white pocket scarf, and like white alligator shoes. And I think like white sunglasses. So he kind of looked a bit like Spike from Me First and the Gimme Gimmes.
Mm-hmm.
And he just walked around like he owned the place, went wherever he wanted to go, backstage, on stage, everywhere, and just because he was Kim Fowley. And, I mean, that guy's history, he's dead now, but that guy's history is is very suspect, as were a lot of those types of people in the music industry. But, there's a few things you can't take away from. I mean, he did write, I think he wrote a couple of 60s hits.
Yeah.
Like, kind of novelty, like Who Put the Bomb in the Bomb, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
For sort of fake bands that were actually probably just the Wrecking Crew under some name, like the Womps or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, when the Sunset Strip was really ripping in the 70s, that's where he put the Runaways together. But so he was kind of like, there was a lot of parallels between the Donnas and the Runaways on that tour. And so those types of guys would always come out to check them out and see them. And of course the Smugglers would get to hang out with them.
Yeah.
Because the Donnas wanted nothing to do with them. We're like, well, we'll hang out with you, weird person.
Yeah.
Tell us some stories. Another guy that the Smugglers had the total pleasure of meeting and hanging out with was Long Gone John from Sympathy for the Record Industry.
Oh, he is a freak.
God.
I love him.
That guy, we met him on our first ever trip to Los Angeles at that Reverend Horton Heat show. Because I think both Reverend Horton Heat and Elvez put out records on Sympathy.
Yeah.
But Smugglers were supposed to, and always were supposed to, and never actually.
I was going to ask you about this too. Like way in the beginning, I heard rumblings about you being on Sympathy.
Yeah, we just never did for whatever reason. It was always a plan. We put it off. Songs went elsewhere, higher priority, and it just never happened. But I remember hanging out with him. What a guy to meet on your first ever trip to LA. And the stories he told us as the show was winding down, I just didn't want to leave him. And, like the lights were coming on in the bar, and, it's like those bouncers are like, come on, people, we got lives, we got kids, you got to go. And I just didn't want to leave his side because, I mean, he was telling stories about like the Manson family and like his 1 degree of separation from the Manson family, like in 69, 70, 71 in California. And how one of the girls, Squeaky or something like that, was really good friends with his girlfriend. And she lived in their apartment. And she left her Manson family jacket. Because back then in the late 60s, everyone had to brand themselves as like a gang. That sort of California motorcycle gang culture, and the family was no different, though it didn't say Manson family on the back of the jacket. I can't remember what it said. Some other, like a Devil's Canyon cult or something like that. But he still owns this denim vest from the original Manson family.
Wow.
And I mean, it's got to be, and it's small because it was for a girl, but he says there's all sorts of like hidden pockets on the inside for like, shoplifting and weapons and all this stuff. So, that I love that kind of specifically American pop culture stuff. And I love that sort of like dark side of the hippie movement. And I love all that stuff. I love writing about it. I love studying it. And I mostly love hearing stories about it. So that's what I loved about the Smugglers was most of all, it was great putting out records and it was great, but I just love meeting people and hearing their stories. And I'm friends with a lot of those people to this day. In fact, when I was writing Dirty Windshields, I got a hold of Long Gone John just to go over the details of that story, just like, to make sure I had everything right. And I didn't. I had forgotten a few things.
Well, time has a way of doing that, but
yeah, like I thought that the jacket did say Manson family, and he was like, no, it says, and whatever. I can't remember actually what it says.
Was it the Love and Death Cult? Because I know that's what they,
Something like that.
because I know they called themselves that at one time, and then they were just
Yeah.
the Family, but they
Yeah.
were
I
something
thought for
special.
some reason I thought devil was in the name. But anyway. Sorry, I'm just reaching down to my heater here.
No, that's quite all right. So I guess kind of like to put a fine point on everything and wrap things up.
Sure.
What is the next like move for you now? Like this record's coming out. You have that tour that you do, this touring show.
Yeah.
What's on tap for you now?
Well, that's a good question. I really enjoy my touring show. It doesn't go as far and wide as Smugglers tours used to, but I'm okay with that. I felt like I really did see a huge part of the world with the Smugglers, and it was great, but they were always urban centers, like downtown New York, downtown Tokyo, downtown Rome. And these days, when I do my tour with my friends playing music, I just want to go to nice places. Like I want to go to places that I would want to like go on vacation to.
Yeah.
So we play a lot of like out here on the coast of BC, there's lots of islands to go to. So we play a lot of islands. We play a lot of resorts, just cool places, nice places that aren't like, that don't carry the stress of like a downtown urban center where you don't know where to park and you could get ripped off if you park there. And, like there's just like the craziness of cities. So I will continue that. I'll probably write another book. I don't know what it will be about. I'll probably work at the CBC for a few more years before I retire. And then with the Smugglers, that's just like, I just never say never. And I would like us to play, if we were to play again, I would like us to play one more time, and I would like it to be all ages, because the Smugglers now have, between us, we have 9 children, and none of those 9 kids have ever seen the Smugglers live.
Wow.
So I would really like for our kids, most specifically my son, who wants to be a musician, he's 9. I want them to see us. So hopefully that'll happen one day.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
Well, that's incredible. I hope that happens, because if it does happen, if it happens in BC, I'll fly out.
Oh, right on.
I absolutely would.
Cool.
Because like I said to you in the email, and it probably sounded like hyperbole, but like the Smugglers were and are a very big deal for me personally. Have been since '93, continue to be, and you're never far from my reach.
Well, I really appreciate that. That's very kind of you to say. I mean, that's 30 years ago. So
yeah. Well, 30 years ago, I was still a teenager, so
yeah. Well, it was great to to have this talk, and thanks for all the questions and the interest and the passion and all that stuff. It's hugely appreciated.
Likewise, I'm so glad you came on. And listen, if the next time a book's coming around, whatever you're doing, I'd love to have you on again so we could talk about it.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you, my friend. Good to see you, and I'll talk to you again soon, hopefully.
All right, great.
Take care.
There it is, folks. My conversation with Grant Lawrence. And let me just say, since, we're not speaking to one another right now at this very moment, I'm not bullshitting when I say the Smugglers were a big deal for me. When the idea of this episode came to pass, and I'd seen that name come across my email, across my computer screen, I was blown away. Sincerely. This record that's being reissued in the Hall of Fame, I'll never forget the day I bought it. I'll never forget the first time I saw the Smugglers. I will never forget how much I love the sound of this record, the mood of it, the party in encapsulated in a piece of music. It is resplendent. It's an experience. It's so much fun to just rock out in your bedroom and grab your guitar or a tennis racket or whatever and just stand in front of a mirror and envision being in the band. I did it as a teenager. I still do it in my late 40s. And as Grant said, you know, the passion that I brought to my questions, that passion is born of a teenage boy loving a band, getting ready to graduate high school and move on within the confines of the punk scene. And, you know, the Smugglers, they were involved in a touchstone of that scene, being on Lookout Records and involved with the bands they were touring with, and just being fundamentally fantastic. With that being said, he's been Grant. I've been Peter. You've been beautiful. And this has been The Book, a very, very bad things podcast. Take care of each other. Spread a little love. And let rock and roll be your guide through this dirty, dirty world. I'll talk to you soon. Good night, y'all.